you're so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
Today's video starts with a trigger warning. If you're an Elon Musk fanboy or fangirl, you're not going to like what I have to say. So watch at your own peril. For everyone else, I still need to make a disclaimer of potential controversy. Over the past decade or so, we've made great strides in normalizing and destigmatizing mental health. Many people suffer from depression, anxiety, stress, and if you haven't suffered from it yourself, you probably know someone close to you who has. We've also obtained greater understanding and acceptance of more serious psychological or developmental conditions, like autism. And I think a part of our ongoing process of destigmatizing these conditions is believing people when they say they suffer from them. And as a general rule, I would definitely say that we should take people's word for it when they say they suffer from a mental health or psychological condition. However, there may be the occasional rare case, that 0.001% of cases, where we're probably better off doubting. And in some cases, this is because we already know that the person has a history of being a pathological liar and a self-absorbed narcissist, and because we think that the fact that they're claiming to have one of these conditions would actually be detrimental to their destigmatization. And I think Elon Musk ticks both boxes. As you may or may not know, Elon Musk, during his opening monologue at Saturday Night Live, confessed that he has Asperger's, which is the milder version of autism. It's part of the autistic spectrum. And I'll be blunt, I think it's bullshit. I don't think he has it. Another disclaimer that I'm going to make is that I'm not a professional psychologist. So I don't have any professional expert capacity to say that he does or he doesn't. So I want to make that very, very clear. But I think his record of just attention seeking and controversy and lying makes one suspect that he actually doesn't have Asperger's. So before I go with the evidence of why I think he doesn't have it, I want to talk a bit about empathy, because empathy is very central to our understanding of the behavior of people with conditions like autism and Asperger's. And we often associate empathy with the idea of stepping into someone else's shoes. And that, broadly speaking, is kind of what empathy is. But in fact, there's two types of empathy. There is emotional or affective empathy, and there is cognitive empathy. And they're very different. I'll give an example of both. Emotional empathy, an example would be if you are with someone and they receive a phone call that tells them that a close family friend or friend died. That person would obviously have probably a breakdown, would cry, maybe they would scream. And you would also feel pretty bad. You would feel horrible at seeing this person go through what they're suffering. You would probably imagine yourself, how would you react if a family member died, or how you would react if suddenly you would be getting such a phone call. And this would be an example of emotional empathy, this idea that you can take someone's emotions and process them as your own. Now, cognitive empathy is slightly different. Cognitive empathy, an example would be if you're on a first date and you spend the first 20 minutes of that first date talking about what your favorite Star Wars movie is, and you are unable to pick up the subtle cues of the person, of your date, where they show that they're not interested whatsoever in the topic of what the best Star Wars movie is, which is Return of the Jedi, by the way. If you're unable to pick those cues, that generally is reflective of a lack of cognitive empathy. And the best example of this would be the show The Big Bang Theory, where one of the characters, Sheldon, who openly has Asperger's, the running joke behind Sheldon is that he's unable to pick up those cues, and hence why he is the more socially awkward of the bunch, despite the fact that they're all socially awkward in some way, because they're geeks and they mostly obsess over geeky things. But Sheldon clearly is a case onto its own, and we can tell the difference in Sheldon's behavior versus the rest of the gang. So what I'm getting at is that autistic people tend to show a deficit of cognitive empathy, but not emotional empathy. And in fact, there are studies that show this is the case. So I'm going to show you one study that measured the empathic disequilibrium, that is, the difference in one type of empathy versus the other. And the results were, controlling for the total empathy score, greater ED, empathic disequilibrium, was found to be positively correlated with autism traits. Specifically, autism traits were found to be elevated in groups of individuals with relatively higher emotional empathy than cognitive empathy, underscoring their imbalance. So, there you have it. People with autism tend to have less cognitive empathy and more emotional empathy. In fact, they might have more emotional empathy than the general population. Now, is there a condition where the reverse is true? Is there a condition where people might have less emotional empathy and more cognitive empathy? In fact, there is. And it's, surprise, surprise, psychopathy or sociopathy, which is sort of the light version of psychopathy, but broadly speaking, the same kind of psychological and personality traits. This study, which was done on 81 male detainees, where they were measured on a scale of psychopathy, the results were, in the genuine condition, results indicate that offenders, irrespective of psychopathy, possessed cognitive empathy, but not effective empathy. In the PIM condition, positive impression management condition, offenders easily simulated high levels of empathy. This is very important. Psychopaths and sociopaths succeed in life by lying, manipulating, and deceiving others. And to do that very successfully, you need to have cognitive empathy. You need to pick up on the cues to know whether, whether your lies, whether your manipulations work. So psychopaths tend to, we often, and this is, I think, part of the reason why we often stigmatize people with autism. We describe them as not having empathy. And we also describe psychopaths as not having empathy. And what we end up doing is putting both in the same basket when that's not the case. Because when we understand that there's two different types of empathy, we understand that autistic people have more emotional empathy, whereas psychopaths have more cognitive empathy. And now that we know this, now that we understand the differences between these two conditions and the differences in the types of empathies that these two conditions have, let's look at Elon Musk's behavior and see which one he lacks. Because if he really has Asperger's, we would assume naturally that what he lacks is cognitive empathy. So let's look at his behavior on Twitter. And I think his behavior on Twitter is pretty reflective of who you are. Not just him, pretty much anyone. And there's no shortage of articles of Elon Musk's worst tweets or more controversial tweets or whatever you want to call it. And let's look at sort of the common denominators of his behavior on Twitter. The first thing that will come to mind is he's incredibly petulant and infantile. Tweets like, "I put the art in fart," or "Jack in the Box should do double duty as a sperm donor clinic." These are tweets that are rather unbecoming of a mature CEO of numerous multi-billion-dollar companies. But he seems to relish this kind of behavior. The other characteristic that we see in Elon Musk is his intolerance for criticism, even from like sites that are actually sarcastic, satirical, like The Onion. He can't take that. He has complete lack of sympathy for pronouns. He has gone on this sort of anti-woke crusade with pronouns, numerous tweets, numerous memes. He makes tweets like, I absolutely support trans. I mean, that almost sounds like something Donald Trump would write, you know. I support the trans. They vote for me, etc. So that's his anti-woke side, anti-SJW side, which I think is very reflective of also a lack of empathy towards these people. So you can see from these tweets sort of the common denominators of his behavior. He acts as a troll and a provocateur. And if you're a troll or a provocateur, you are in the business of creating reactions in others, emotional reactions in others. And that to me suggests that you do have cognitive empathy. If you're aware of the reaction that you cause in others, that is part of cognitive empathy. On the other hand, Elon Musk displays a complete lack of emotional empathy in his behavior as CEOs of his companies. He is strongly anti-union. He's notorious for breaking up any attempts for his workplaces to unionize. He was a COVID skeptic from the start as well, which I think goes against his reputation as being, you know, science-minded, rationally minded, whatever you want to describe him as. And part of that has been his opposition to lockdowns and his calls, his threats that he was going to open his factories even despite the law being not to do that. So if you don't care about human life of your employees, that to me suggests a lack of emotional empathy, a complete lack of emotional empathy if you don't care about human life. So there you go. That's his Twitter record. And I think what follows here is the question whether we would think that Elon Musk would lie about something like this, about having Asperger's. And the answer is, yeah, I definitely think he would. I think he would lie in front of millions of people. Yeah, of course. He does this all the time on Twitter. Here's one tweet where he says, May 1st, 2020, I'm selling almost all physical possessions, will own no house. Clearly he hasn't done that. This was clearly a joke. This was done for the lulz. He knows that when he says something like this, articles will be written about how Elon Musk is going to sell all his physical possessions. And he's going to get a laugh at realizing the reaction that he causes on other people. People that he probably thinks are too stupid to know that this was just, you know, sarcasm, lulz. That is the game. That is what he does on Twitter. He enjoys this. His ego gets boosted when people react to him. And that does not seem to be the characteristics of people with Asperger's. And I want to be clear. Any type of person on the planet can be an asshole. I'm sure that there are people with Asperger's who are assholes. I'm sure there are autistic people who are assholes. But often our interpretation as people, as non-autistic people, the way that we might be tempted to often interpret the behavior of people with autism or Asperger's may incorrectly identify their behavior as being the behavior of assholes, when that's not the case. If you have people with a lack of these social skills, we can construe their lack of picking up these cues, or their sort of disinterest in our things, or maybe their obsession with their things, as being rude or arrogant, characteristics that we often associate assholes to be. Again, this will vary enormously depending on who we're actually talking about. I have autistic friends, and honestly, I think they're if they hadn't ever told me that they were autistic, I would have never guessed. So behavior will vary. It is possible. Like I said, the one thing that I will give is we will never really know if Elon, barring evidence of a psychological exam that's been issued by a professional, we don't know if Elon Musk actually has Asperger's or not. But I look at these tweets and I see just no evidence of any emotional empathy, or any lack of cognitive empathy, because someone who dedicates so much of his life to be a troll and to be a provocateur clearly understands the emotional reaction he will have on others. Now, why do I think this is detrimental to the cause of destigmatizing autism, which is the purpose of this video? I want to really emphasize this, because I'll say it again, I don't want this video to be construed as sort of a blank check to always doubt people who have autism or who have any other sort of psychological or developmental condition or mental health issue. I don't want this video to be a blank check for this. I think what he's doing is incredibly harmful, because what he's doing is something that a lot of people have identified as sort of common behavior to justify your asshole nature. And the fact is, we now dish out. So the problem with, there's always a downside. There's always a flip side to the fact that we're more conscious of things like autism and Asperger's. And that is that we often trivialize it. We often use the terms to describe someone whose behavior might not be construed as standard behavior. And so we often callously describe them. Oh, they must be under the spectrum, on the spectrum. They must have Asperger's. And there was an article written in the New York Magazine from 2012. So this is not new. And I want to read this paragraph because I think it nails the issue that I'm describing, and why Elon Musk's claim to have Asperger's is very problematic. So I'll read it. Because Asperger's lives on the outskirts of normal, and because its symptoms can resemble willfully antisocial behavior, there's now a presumption of excuse-making whenever someone invokes it to get out of pickle. Last October, South Park aired an episode in which the people at an Asperger's group therapy center turn out to be faking their symptoms and not even to believe in the reality of the disorder. Quote, "You're not autistic," a doctor tells Hugh Laurie's abrasive character in an episode of House. "You don't even have Asperger's. You wish you did. It would exempt you from the rules, give you freedom, absolve you of responsibility, let you date 17-year-olds. But most important, it would mean that you're not just a jerk." What does this remind you of? Can you see a parallel in Elon Musk's Twitter behavior with this idea? And can you see why it's so problematic if he's lying about this, which I think he is? Because now he's basically protecting his asshole behavior. He's making it immune to criticism by supposedly having Asperger's. And what he does now, being such an important public figure, is that now we will be tempted to associate Asperger's with asshole behavior like his. So I really, I showed the evidence in his Twitter behavior that in fact his problem is not a lack of cognitive empathy. His problem is too much of it, which is why he's so manipulative. And if anything, his problem is a lack of emotional empathy, because he doesn't care about his workers. He doesn't seem to care about human life in general. So, I repeat, what is the disorder that has no shortage of cognitive empathy and a deficit of emotional empathy? It's psychopathy or sociopathy. And I think that's really what he has. And I think that's what a lot of people in a position of huge economic power, like he does, has. And there's been studies that show that CEOs, on average, tend to have sociopathic traits, much more than the general population. One study even suggested something like 20-25%. I thought it was a joke, and I actually researched it for my book. Turns out it was true. So, look at his behavior and honestly tell me that that is the behavior of someone with Asperger's, or, as is more likely, someone with sociopathy. So that is why I'm not buying it. That is what I am calling bullshit. And I repeat, for the third time, because I want to make it very clear, I do not want this video to be construed as a blank check to doubt people when they claim they have a mental health issue or a psychological condition. By no means. But I think that as a society, we're better off doubting what he says, because I think that it will be used, he's weaponizing this to his own favor, and the only losers here will be actual people with Asperger's or autism, who will now be associated with the asshole behavior that Elon Musk has normalized. So, on that note, thanks for watching this video. If you like it, please like, please share, please subscribe. It's a new channel, so I appreciate any new subscribers, and I guarantee you there will be more content like this in the future, and definitely more Elon Musk bashing, because he's an awful human being, completely overrated, and I really don't know what is wrong with people who adore him the way they do. And I think maybe we should invent a psychological condition for people, for his fanboys and fangirls who obsess way too much over someone who doesn't deserve that degree of adoration. So thanks for watching.